Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. The most dangerous person in the room is the one who already knows and just lets you keep talking. You ever watch someone lie to your face with full confidence? And you had to bite your tongue just to see how far they'd go with the script they rehearsed. That's not confusion, that's strategy, that's spiritual chess. And chosen one, you've been 10 steps ahead the whole time. Here's a wild fact. According to psychological studies, over 90% of communication is nonverbal, which means people think they're hiding secrets with words, but their energy is leaking the entire truth. And guess what? You were fluent in those silent confessions. They thought they were slick, they thought you were slow. Plot twist. You were the silent sniper, locked in, recording everything in your spirit while pretending not to notice their performance. And now they're shook. They're running mental marathons trying to figure out how you connected dots they didn't even know were dots. You didn't need to ask questions, you didn't need to fight for clarity, because you already knew. Not by snooping, not by spying, but because discernment is your birthright, intuition is your GPS. And divine insight, that's your superpower. This ain't just another you saw through them story. No, this is deeper. This is spiritual surveillance. They thought they were manipulating you while you were busy memorizing their patterns, their energy shifts, and the fine print of their lies. Now they're not just shocked. You've got them paranoid, wondering how long you knew, who else you told, and what you're about to do with the truth. Buckle up, because in this video we're exposing the reason your accuracy left them breathless, and why pretending not to know was the most powerful move you ever made. And if you've ever had to fake surprise just to protect your peace, oh, this one's for you. Number 1. You never asked questions because you were studying motives, not stories. You never asked too many questions because deep down you weren't trying to hear their version of the story. You were watching for the deeper motive behind their words. You were never after the surface level details. What you were really studying was why they were telling you certain things, what they left out, and what their energy was doing while their mouth was moving. While most people get caught up in what's being said, you were locked in on the pauses, the stutters, the way their eyes shifted. You knew from the jump that people lie, but energy never does. And so instead of confronting every suspicious detail or chasing after the truth, you let them talk. You let them feel comfortable. You let them think they had you wrapped around their story. But in reality, you were collecting data. You were mentally noting every inconsistency, every contradiction, every strange reaction they had when the topic got too close to the truth. You didn't need to interrupt them. You were letting them hang themselves with their own words, quietly, calmly, patiently. They thought your silence meant you didn't know, but it meant you were watching, learning, letting the truth reveal itself without force. You didn't come to the conclusion through paranoia. You saw the red flags. You just weren't ready to let them know you did. That kind of self-restraint scared them, because now, in hindsight, they're realizing you never truly asked because you already had the answers. They just hadn't confessed them out loud yet. And that's what's blowing their mind now. That while they were pretending, performing, and trying to manipulate the narrative, you were wide awake the entire time. Your questions were never for information. They were pressure tests. You didn't need clarity because you had discernment. You weren't looking for facts, you were reading the spiritual fine print. Now they're remembering every conversation and realizing how exposed they really were. And it's haunting them, because they weren't fooling someone oblivious, they were putting on a show for someone who already had the script memorized. You never needed to ask the right question to get the truth. You just needed to be still long enough for them to tell on themselves. And they did, over and over, without even realizing it. Number 2, you let them lie because you needed to know how deep the deception ran. You let them lie to you on purpose, not because you were gullible, not because you didn't notice, but because you wanted to see just how far they were willing to go. You needed to see the full scope of their character, not just the parts they show when they're pretending to be decent. And nothing reveals a person faster than giving them the space to lie while you pretend not to notice. You weren't caught off guard. You clocked the lie as soon as it came out their mouth. You just didn't flinch. You let them believe they were getting away with it. You watched them pile on more lies, one after another, not realizing you were keeping receipts, not physical ones, but spiritual ones. You were taking mental screenshots, storing patterns and connecting dots. You weren't hurt by the lie, you were disappointed by how easy it was for them to look you in the eye and do it. But you needed that disappointment. You needed to know the truth of who they were when they thought you weren't paying attention. That's why you didn't interrupt. That's why you didn't confront them right away. Because catching them in a lie wouldn't have exposed what they're capable of. Letting them lie without resistance did. You were studying the depth of their deception. You weren't just catching them in the act. You were watching them build a world of dishonesty with confidence. What they never considered was that you were trained for this. Life taught you how to read silence, how to detect tension, how to spot the moment someone's eyes shift, because their soul got uncomfortable. They thought your kindness meant cluelessness. They didn't know you were raised around manipulators. So you became fluent in the language of lies a long time ago. You just stopped speaking it. Now the truth is out and they're stunned. They can't believe you knew all along, but that's the part that stings the most for them. Not that they lied, but that you let them lie and still kept your power. You didn't expose them on their timeline. You waited until the damage was already done to them, and now there's no coming back from it. You let them walk into their own trap, smiling. Number 3, they didn't realize you were spiritually eavesdropping. They didn't realize you were spiritually eavesdropping the whole time. While they were having secret conversations behind closed doors, whispering schemes and bad-mouthing you in private, your spirit had already picked up on everything. That's the part they never factored in. They thought if they said it where you couldn't physically hear it, you'd never know. But they forgot one thing. You don't operate in just the physical. You hear in the spirit, you read the air, you feel the temperature of a room shift when your name gets mentioned behind your back. Your accuracy wasn't from guessing. It wasn't intuition in the way most people think of it. You weren't connecting dots. The truth was dropping into your spirit like divine mail. God was revealing things. Your dreams were showing you details. Your spirit would get uncomfortable around people before your mind even knew why. And now it's making sense why certain people suddenly started acting weird, pulling back, or changing up their energy around you. You didn't walk in on their conversations, but you felt what was being said. You picked up on it before they even said it. That's what shocked them, because you started responding to things they hadn't even admitted to doing yet. You started pulling back without having evidence. You shifted your energy without any confrontation. They couldn't figure out how you knew. They never imagined that your source wasn't human, it was divine. They underestimated how closely God walks with you. They thought if they kept their mouths shut in front of you, they were safe. But your spirit was in rooms they didn't even know you had access to. And now they're uneasy. They're questioning what else you know. They're rethinking all the conversations they had, wondering if something slipped, but nothing slipped. You just see. You just know. Not because someone told you, but because your gift exposes things that were never meant to stay hidden. They were so busy trying to block your ears. They forgot you don't need to hear with your ears. You hear with your soul. You hear with your knowing. And now they're realizing you never had to be in the room to know what was said. You were always 2 realms ahead. Number 4, your calm was a trap they fell into. Your calm was the setup, and they walked right into it. They mistook your quiet for cluelessness, your peace for weakness. They thought because you weren't reacting, you weren't aware. But that was the trap. You weren't confused, you were watching. You weren't frozen, you were calculating. Every time they thought they were getting away with something, you were one step closer to confirming what you already suspected. People like that only understand chaos. They expect retaliation, confrontation, or loud exposure. So when you didn't give them any of that, they assumed you had no clue what was really going on. But the truth is, your silence was your surveillance. You weren't disengaged. You were storing every word, every shift, every contradiction in your spirit. Your calm wasn't because you were unsure. It was because you had already decided what to do, and you knew timing was everything. They thought they were safe because you smiled, because you said nothing, because you kept showing up with grace and stillness. But every time you sat in that silence, you were allowing them more space to reveal who they really were. You didn't need to chase the truth. You let it unfold naturally, because that's what it always does when someone feels too comfortable being messy in front of someone they believe is too soft to notice. They underestimated you because you weren't loud. They didn't realize your power was in how unbothered you appeared, but deep inside you were miles ahead of the drama. You had already clocked the betrayal. You had already seen through the fake support. You were simply letting them keep digging, not because you were petty, but because some people won't believe you until they're buried under the weight of their own lies. Now they're sitting in the wreckage, confused about how everything fell apart so fast. But the truth is, you saw it coming the entire time. You just didn't panic. You let peace protect your moves. You let stillness keep you hidden in plain sight. And now that the storm has passed, they're left speechless. Not just because you knew, but because you never once flinched while they walked straight into the fall they set up for you. Number 5. Your accuracy offends them because it exposes their entire masked identity. Your accuracy offends them because it doesn't just point out a mistake, it pulls the entire mask off. You didn't just catch a slip-up. You didn't just find one hidden truth. What you saw was the whole performance, the personality they created, the image they built, the web of lies they depended on to survive socially, emotionally, or even spiritually. And in one moment of quiet precision, you shattered it all with your clarity. They weren't just living with a lie. They were the lie. Their whole identity was carefully put together to impress, manipulate, or hide. So when your insight pierced through that surface, it didn't just bruise their pride. It exposed how empty the structure really was. Your gift didn't just uncover something minor. It brought to light the entire system they used to function. A system of pretending, of performing, of controlling how others saw them. They're not just mad you knew, they're disturbed that you saw them without needing to be told. Because if you saw it, who else will? If you picked it apart so effortlessly, how fragile was it to begin with? That's where the fear kicks in. You didn't just ruin a story, you collapsed a false identity they've depended on for years. And that kind of exposure feels like death to someone who built their worth on illusion. They thought they had the upper hand. They thought they could control the narrative. But when you spoke, when you revealed even a fraction of what you saw, it rattled them, because your discernment went straight to the foundation. It didn't argue details. It confronted essence, and that is something they can't defend. Now they're uncomfortable around you, not because you hurt them, but because they can no longer pretend in your presence. You've become the mirror that reflects what they try to hide from the world and from themselves. You didn't try to ruin them. You didn't even try to expose them publicly. But your truth alone made it impossible for their false reality to keep standing. Your accuracy is threatening, not because it's violent, but because it's undeniable. And now they're scrambling, not just to recover, but to rebuild something that wasn't real to begin with. Number 6, they thought you needed evidence, but you were the evidence. They thought you needed hard proof, some text messages, a screenshot, a witness to back up your intuition, but you never needed any of that, because you were the evidence. The moment your energy shifted, the moment you pulled back, the moment you stopped engaging with their performance, that was the proof something wasn't right. You didn't argue. You didn't beg for truth. You just aligned with what your spirit already told you, and that was enough. What they didn't understand is that your knowing doesn't come from guesswork or suspicion. It's not paranoia, it's not overthinking, it's divine clarity. Your spirit knew before your mind could even articulate it. You weren't waiting for confirmation from outside sources. You were the confirmation. The shift in your energy, the way you moved differently, the silence they suddenly felt from you, that was your response. You didn't scream it, you became it. They were expecting you to fight for validation. They thought you'd go digging, exposing, trying to convince people of what was happening. But you didn't have to, because when you walk with truth, you don't chase evidence. You are the disruption. Your peace in the middle of the chaos made them question everything. Your stillness was louder than any proof they thought you lacked. They thought they got away with it because you didn't react the way they expected. But what they missed was that you weren't frozen. You were just sure. You were so grounded in what your spirit revealed, you didn't need to argue it. You didn't need to prove it. Your detachment was the loudest announcement they could have received. Now they're spiraling. Not because you exposed them, but because they realize your calm wasn't confusion, it was confirmation. The fact that you're no longer available to them, no longer feeding the lie, no longer matching their mask, that alone is your evidence, and it's irrefutable. You didn't have to catch them in the act. You didn't need someone else to tell you what happened. The truth lived in your body before it showed up in your reality. And now, they're left with a haunting realization. The one person they tried to deceive never needed proof, because you've been holding the truth the entire time. Number 7, they're not just shocked you knew, they're scared of what else you see. They're not just shocked that you figured it out, they're genuinely scared now. Because if you saw that, what else have you seen? What else do you know that you're not saying? That's what's haunting them. It's not just the fact that you were right, it's the uncomfortable silence you're keeping after being right. They expected a confrontation, they expected noise, but you gave them none of that. And that's what's got them spiraling. They're doing mental gymnastics now, rethinking every interaction, replaying every lie, going over every moment where they dropped their guard around you, wondering if you caught more than you let on, and deep down, they know you did. Because you've always seen too clearly, picked up too quickly, responded too calmly. They can't help but wonder, what do you really know? The fact that you haven't said everything makes it worse. Because now they're not just dealing with guilt, they're living in fear of the next reveal. Your silence has become their paranoia. You didn't expose them. You didn't even retaliate. But your presence alone is doing something they can't explain. It's uncomfortable, it's heavy, it's like they know they've been seen and they can't undo it. You didn't just make them nervous, you've made them hyper-aware, because you carry a level of insight that makes people second-guess their own deception. You move with the kind of knowing that doesn't need validation, and that's terrifying to someone who survives on manipulation. You're a threat not because you're loud, but because you're accurate, and worse, quietly accurate. They underestimated you once. They won't do it again. Now, every time you look at them, they wonder what you're seeing. Every time you speak, they wonder if there's a hidden meaning, and every time you say nothing at all, they wonder if this is the moment you're choosing to keep something to yourself. Again. Your awareness has shifted the power dynamic. They're no longer in control of the story. You are. And even though you're not weaponizing what you know, the fact that you could is what's keeping them up at night. Your presence has become a reminder that nothing hidden stays hidden forever, not when someone like you is in the room. Number 8, they confessed without knowing. You were reading their subconscious the whole time. They confessed without even realizing it, and that's what's messing with them now. While they thought they were keeping it together, smiling, talking, pretending, you were reading every little shift, every micro-expression, every moment their eyes hesitated or their energy stuttered. They didn't know that their body was telling the truth their mouth was trying to hide. You weren't just listening to what they said, you were reading the inconsistencies between what they said and how they said it. You were never fooled by polished words or rehearsed stories. You were tuned into the space between their sentences, the tension in their jaw, the flicker in their eye, the forced laugh that landed just a second too late. That's what told you everything. Their nervous habits gave them away. The way they over-explained or avoided a direct answer told you more than any confession ever could. They thought they were being slick, but you were already 10 steps ahead, decoding them in real time. People forget that the body never lies. The subconscious always leaks the truth. And you've trained yourself, consciously or spiritually, to read that language. While they were working hard to perform, you were locked in on the patterns, catching the small cracks in their mask. They didn't know that every hesitation was a highlight. Every fake smile was a red flag. Every contradiction was you watching the puzzle pieces rearrange themselves. Now they're nervous. They don't know what exactly gave them away, but they feel like you know, and the reason they feel that way is because deep down, they know they weren't solid around you. They know something slipped. They just can't pinpoint how or when. That's why your presence now unsettles them. You don't have to say a word. They feel seen just standing next to you. You weren't reading their story, you were reading their soul. That's the difference. You didn't need confessions. You didn't need them to admit it. They confessed with their posture, with their tone, with every little thing they thought you wouldn't notice. But you did. All of it. And now they know you were never fooled. You were just silent while they told on themselves piece by piece. Number 9, you let them think they were fooling you because you needed them to reveal the final play. You let them think they were getting away with it. You could have called it out early, could have pulled the plug the moment you felt that first red flag. but you didn't. Not because you were blind, but because you were watching. You knew exactly what was happening, but you weren't going to interrupt the performance halfway through. You needed to see how far they were willing to go. You needed to know what their final move would be, because that's where the real truth lives. You gave them room to keep lying. You made it easy. You smiled, you nodded. You played along just enough to keep them feeling comfortable in the deception. Why? Because people get sloppy when they think they're winning. They stop hiding as carefully. They show more of their hand. And that's exactly what you were waiting for. The moment they expose not just their tactics, but their true motive. The final play always reveals what the game was really about. They thought your quietness meant confusion. But you weren't confused. You were calculating. You were mapping patterns. You were watching how they moved when they thought you were emotionally invested. And as painful as it was, you had the patience to let it play out. Because surface-level betrayal is easy to spot, but you were after something deeper. You needed to know who they were when they thought they had you wrapped. The moment they made that last move, the one they thought would break you, that was when you saw it all with clarity. Not just what they did, but why they did it. Their mask fell, not because you forced it off, but because they became so confident in your silence that they removed it themselves. And when it dropped, there it was. The truth in full form. No pretending, no backpedaling, just raw intention staring you in the face. Now they're shocked, because the person they thought they were fooling was 3 steps ahead the entire time. And what stings the most is realizing you didn't stop them. You let them go that far just to be sure. Just to watch them tell on themselves with no pressure, no accusations, no exposure, only your quiet, deadly knowing. Number 10, your insight wasn't analytical, it was ancestral. Your insight didn't come from overthinking or connecting surface-level dots. It came from deep, ancestral memory. What you felt wasn't a hunch. It wasn't just intuition. It was something older, something encoded in your spirit before you ever walked into the situation. You didn't just sense something was off. You knew. And that knowing didn't start with you. It was passed down. Your ancestors have seen this before. The betrayal, the manipulation, the charm disguised as good intention. They lived through it, survived it, and now they speak through you, not with words but with sudden awareness, with the tightness in your chest when something isn't right, with the internal alarms that go off before your mind even knows why. They weren't just stories from the past. They were lessons embedded in your bones. And in those moments where you felt something shift, you were feeling their collective memory rise to protect you. You weren't analyzing people. You were remembering them, their energy, their tactics, their spirit signatures. And while others needed proof, you moved on insight that came from a deeper place, a place the average person doesn't access. That's why your decisions didn't make sense to people watching from the outside. Because what guided you wasn't logic, it was lineage. Your bloodline was talking to you the whole time. You've been protected in ways you don't always understand, pulled away from people without warning, given dreams that made no sense until later, shown signs that felt random but turned out to be divine. That's not overthinking, that's ancestral technology. You carry codes in your spirit that most people can't interpret, but you feel them when they activate. When danger is near, when truth is buried, when someone is pretending. And that's what caught them off guard. You responded to something they didn't realize they were revealing. You moved with confidence they thought you shouldn't have, but it wasn't just you in that moment. It was generations of wisdom moving through you. You don't just carry insight, you carry legacy, and legacy never forgets patterns. It remembers, it prepares, and when necessary, it speaks, and you are the voice. They thought you were smart. They didn't realize you were ancestrally armed. Number 11, they built their strategy on your blindness. Now their empire is collapsing. They built their entire strategy on the assumption that you were blind to what was going on. Every lie they told, every manipulation they carried out, every move they made, it all depended on you being unaware. You were the foundation of their illusion. They counted on your trust. They depended on your silence. They believed your kindness meant ignorance. So they went all in, building a whole false reality around you, confident that you would never question it. But what they didn't expect was that you were awake the entire time. You saw it, you felt it, you just didn't say anything. And that silence, that is what gave you the upper hand. Because while they were building their little empire of deceit, you were documenting everything in your spirit. You weren't clueless, you were strategic. You let them show you who they really were. You let them think they had control. Now that you have exposed the truth, not necessarily with words, but through your actions, your distance, your alignment, the entire structure they built is collapsing. The lies they told to others can no longer hold up. The fake relationships they formed to protect their image are breaking apart. The control they thought they had over you and the narrative is gone. They never imagined what would happen if you knew, because their entire game only worked in the dark. It could not survive your clarity. It could not survive your awakening. Now they are scrambling, trying to fix what is already ruined. They are realizing that once the illusion breaks, it can never be put back together the same way again. The power they thought they had is slipping. The respect they faked their way into is fading. And the people they tried to turn against you, some of them are starting to see the truth now too, because truth has a ripple effect. It spreads. And the moment you stopped playing along, the mask started to fall apart on its own. They thought the danger was you finding out. What they never expected was that you already knew, and that you were just waiting for the right moment to let their own actions expose them. Now their kingdom of control is crumbling, and all you had to do was see. Number 12, your truth was so precise, they thought you were spying. Your truth was so precise, it scared them. You didn't just hit close, you hit dead center. You spoke on things they thought no one could possibly know. Details they never said out loud. Behaviors they thought they masked. Motives they believed were well hidden. And when you brought it to light, whether with your words, your silence, or the way you moved differently, they were shaken. It wasn't just accurate. It was surgical, sharp, clean, too specific to be random. So what did they do? They assumed you were spying. They convinced themselves someone must have told you something. Maybe you hacked something. Maybe someone leaked their secrets, because in their mind there's no way you could have just known. But you did, without digging, without asking, without chasing anyone down. You just knew. And that's what shook them the most. It wasn't noise that exposed them. It was divine timing and a spiritual gift that made it look effortless. They had no clue how tuned in you really are. You're not the type to need constant evidence. You don't need to hear everything with your ears when your spirit already caught it. What they fail to understand is that your clarity doesn't come from human sources. It comes from alignment. It comes from discernment, from walking with God. You don't operate in the same realm as manipulation. While they were working overtime to hide, you were already 3 steps ahead because your intuition doesn't miss. They assumed you had an inside informant, but your only informant was the Holy Spirit. Your only source was divine timing. The truth showed up to you in flashes, in dreams, in sudden clarity, and you knew exactly when to act and how to say it. You didn't need help. You didn't need surveillance. You had stillness, observation, and a direct line to truth. Now they're unsettled. Because if you saw that, what else do you see? If you could say something so accurate without ever being told, how much more do you know that you haven't even said yet? That's what's haunting them. You've made them paranoid without lifting a finger, because now they know you don't need to search for truth when it walks straight into your spirit. Number 13, you didn't react because you were calculating your exit strategy. You didn't react not because you didn't feel anything, but because you were already planning your way out. Every lie, every shift in energy, every little betrayal, they weren't just emotional hits, they were data. And while they thought you were sitting there confused, stuck, or weak, you were silently building your exit strategy piece by piece. They mistook your patience for passivity. They thought they had more time to play with your emotions. But you weren't stuck. You were calculating. You didn't lash out. You didn't confront them. You didn't argue your worth. Instead, you went quiet. You stepped back. You started watching more closely, listening more deeply, and taking mental screenshots of who they really were. And the whole time they were patting themselves on the back, thinking they had you right where they wanted you. What they didn't realize was that you were emotionally detaching while they were getting more reckless. You weren't waiting for an apology. You weren't hoping they'd change. You were giving yourself enough space to confirm the truth. And once you had it, you knew exactly what needed to be done. You didn't just leave emotionally, you left spiritually. You started moving your energy, pulling it back piece by piece, and by the time you were ready to walk away physically, you had already been gone internally. That's what hurt them in the end. Not just that you left, but that you left clean. No drama, no warning, no mess. You didn't give them the explosion they were hoping for, something they could use to twist the narrative. Instead, you gave them silence. You gave them absence. You gave them a door that closed so quietly it left an echo. And that's the kind of exit people don't recover from. Now they're stuck trying to figure out how they lost access to someone they thought they had full control over. But you were never theirs to control. You were just patient enough to watch them disqualify themselves, while you prepared for the most strategic move of your life. You didn't react because reacting would have meant you were still emotionally tied. But you weren't. You had already made peace with the truth, and that peace became your power. Number 14, they thought you were the subject. Turns out you were the judge. They thought you were the one under the microscope. They thought you were the one being tested, watched and evaluated. They approached you like a project, someone to manipulate, observe and control. In their minds, they were running the show. They believed they were pulling the strings, setting the tone, dictating the flow. But what they didn't realize is that while they were busy trying to analyze you, you were the one conducting the real investigation. You saw right through the performance, and instead of reacting, you started taking notes, quietly, intentionally. They thought they were watching you fall for the trap, but you were already 3 steps ahead, watching them expose themselves piece by piece. Every move they made, every test they gave you, every time they pushed your buttons, it all became evidence. Evidence of who they really were, not just who they pretended to be. You were never the subject, you were the judge, the one quietly observing, not with emotion but with clarity. You weren't taking their behavior personally, you were letting it reveal everything. While they were checking to see if you were real, loyal, or easy to control, you were examining their character, measuring how far they'd go when they thought no one was watching, seeing who they became when they believed they had the upper hand, and when it was time, you didn't lash out, you didn't beg, you didn't defend yourself. You just delivered the verdict with your silence, your distance, your refusal to play along. And that's when it hit them. They were never in control. You weren't just watching, you were weighing. You were letting them show their cards, not to punish them, but to understand who they were at the core. Now they're sitting with the truth, and it stings. Because they were so busy playing a role, they didn't notice they were being evaluated the whole time. They thought they were building the case against you, but they were giving you everything you needed to make your final decision. And that decision is irreversible. You don't go back on a verdict. You don't retry a case you already ruled on. And this one? Guilty, with no chance for appeal. They thought they were playing chess with a pawn. Turns out they were standing before a master. Quiet, precise, spiritually armed. They underestimated you because you didn't react, you didn't expose, and you didn't fight dirty. But every silence was strategy. Every moment you appeared as still was packed with spiritual movement. You weren't confused, you were collecting proof. You weren't naive, you were watching the full play unfold. And while they were performing, you were judging the character behind the costume. Now they're scrambling to figure out how you knew, when you knew, and what else you might still be holding back. That's the price of deception. Truth doesn't just sting, it echoes. And you didn't just find the lie, you exposed the foundation it was built on, the false identity, the manipulated story, the ego that needed control. You didn't come to destroy them, you came with clarity, but clarity always destroys what isn't real. Your power was never in how loud you spoke, it was in how deeply you saw. You heard what wasn't said, you felt what was hidden, and you moved when God told you to move. You didn't just survive manipulation, you dismantled it with elegance, with spiritual intelligence, with ancestral backing. Let them be shocked. Let them be afraid, because they were never ready for someone like you, someone who doesn't just see through lies but walks in truth. Now the masks are off, the performance is over, and you're still standing with your head high, your hands clean, and your spirit untouched. You weren't the fool, you were the lesson, and they will never forget it. If this message stirred something deep in your soul, don't just scroll away. This is your confirmation. Your clarity is power, and your silence is strategy. Subscribe to the channel if you're walking in truth, purpose, and divine alignment. Like this video if you've ever been underestimated, but came out wiser and stronger. Comment below with "I saw it all and I never said a word" if this resonated with your journey. Share this with someone who's been quietly holding their power and deserves to know they're not alone. This isn't just content. This is spiritual truth, raw and unfiltered. And if you're part of the chosen, this is your space. Welcome home. God bless you.